Well, Professor, let's start when you weren't a long time ago in your childhood in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Was yours an intellectually rich environment?
Actually, I guess classically you'd say it wasn't. So I came from a probably lower middle class economic strata. And my mother worked in a bank, and my father worked in a appliance store. Mm-hmm. So appliance stores don't exist anymore, but they are now sections in a Best Buy or something, right? But appliance stores used to be the place you go for toasters and washing machines and things like that. And it turned out that the appliance store was the conduit to my intellectual development.
Wonderful. Tell me about how.
I'll tell you how. So I was born in 45, and so the war was ending.
You were barely born in 45.
Barely.
The last day of 45.
Yes, I was. And the war had just ended, and a new thing was coming online. It had existed experimentally before, called television. Okay, and so right around, I'm guessing, 48, 49, starts to become actual broadcast commercial television in the big cities, one of which is San Francisco. Okay, so that meant if you were going to go commercial with television, you had to sell televisions. But of course, there were no television stores, right? So where do you sell televisions? You sell them at the appliance store. Okay. So one day my father comes home, and he's got this box. Well, actually, he probably had a lot of stuff around.
Yeah, the screens were small, but
the screen was about the size of our cell phones today.
Right.
The resolution much worse, right? And he sets this down, and because it was so small, he also brought home this big magnifying glass that you set in front of it, which, I didn't realize would only enhance the size, not the resolution, but it at least allowed several people to see what was going on at once. Okay. And so at that moment, when he brought that home, I became what I consider sort of the oldest member of the television generation. So ever since then, kids are born, they're plucked down in front of a television, and that's how they learn culture, they learn, academic things, they learn everything that way, right? Okay, so the result of plucking that down when I was probably 4 years old. Was monumental. It made me a terrible reader. I love reading. I read all the time, but I just can't read fast, and I can't read out loud. I just never developed that skill very much. But I learned tremendous amounts from that television and its successors. And sometime after getting the television, shows started to come on like Mr. Wizard.
Yes.
Okay. And so Mr. Wizard appeared, and he did amazing things. Like he showed us a hard-boiled egg and a milk glass. And then he showed us a milk glass with hard-boiled egg inside. But the neck of the milk glass was not the adequate diameter to pass the egg. And he said he was going to show us how to get it in nonetheless. And to me, that was a revelation, right?
Right, of course.
And that's probably, those moments were when I think I really began the journey as a scientist, mathematician.
So your first mentor was Mr. Wizard?
I can't say, there are many mentors that come over that television, right? But yes, Mr. Wizard was huge.
Certainly represented that kind of influence.
That's right.
And your parents are not saying get away from the television and read or something. They're happy to have you watch it.
I'm sitting there watching it.
Okay, now some of your colleagues, as laureates, wanted to know how the damn thing worked. What about you? Did you couldn't?
I don't remember that.
Care about?
I only cared to this extent that I only cared so that I could get the maximum number of stations tuned in, and that required a little bit of skill at that time.
Right.
But no, I didn't care how it worked.
I want to get you to school, the lower grades at this point,
Yeah.
elementary and then through high school. What are you interested in? What kinds of teachers are you having?
Yes, I'm interested in absolutely nothing, okay? And this maybe I spoke too quickly. I did have some interest in the sciences. I got a chemistry set, and then I got a friend who was into chemistry, and we did a little chemistry. And I took band and those things. But I really wasn't interested. I didn't even have the concept of that you could be interested in something. A lot of this stuff escaped me, it seems. But I did have one of those pivotal teachers who changed my life.
Please.
Okay. So when I was about to graduate from high school, there was this lady. She taught a class in literature. I assume I was there because I had to take it. But we got into Shakespeare. Okay. And that was such a revelation to me because we would read some Shakespeare and she would expose deeper meaning. For me, the story was the story. I got the fact that, people were stabbing each other and stuff like that. That was cool, and ghosts. But that there could be deeper meaning. It's like, wow, what's this going on?
Right.
So one day she calls me up after class and she says, Leonard, what are you going to do when you graduate? And I said, I don't know. I guess I'll go to City College, which was the sort of junior college there. That's where my brother went. I don't know. I never thought about it. She said, well, listen, why don't you go to Berkeley instead? And I said, okay. And that was one of those, splitting of paths transformed my life.
How come you got in? Were your grades good?
My grades were not that good. I recall I had just less than a B average. Okay, but B average meant something then, not like today. B average meant I was probably in the top 10 in my school at that time, top 10%. But nothing special. But I could take the SAT test, I think it was.
You took the SAT.
Yes, in which case, I got not so great on the English part, but on the math part,
Did you know that about yourself? That math was going to be a strong suit?
I knew it indirectly. That is to say, when I would take math classes and Euclid's, axioms and everything, all of it was obvious to me. It was so simple to me, and I would get comments from my teachers like, wow, whatever. And then I'd get dragged in all through my life. I'd get dragged in to principals' offices with my parents. And the discussion always went, Leonard's not living up to his potential. Right? So I guess I was doing well on those on those exams all the time. But no, I wasn't really astute.
Okay, so you did well. You did well on part of your SAT.
That's right.
Enough on the rest to get you into Berkeley, which is already certainly a distinguished university.
Yeah.
How are you deciding? Of course, you don't have to decide in major for 2 years, but where are you going?
Yeah. So
intellectually,
here's where I'm going. So I'm Jewish. I joined a Jewish fraternity, and they all want to be doctors.
Right.
And those, they all want to be doctors. And so I said, well, I guess I'll be a doctor too, right? And so I started to take biology classes.
Right.
And one day I remember I was looking through, microscope at some cut up beast.
Right.
And I said, I hate this stuff. And I got up and I walked out. I dropped all those courses.
Thereby breaking your father's heart.
My fraternity brother's heart, perhaps.
Yeah, but your father is letting you progress. He's not saying, this is where I want you to go.
Yeah, I guess so. It's a good question. My father isn't giving me much guidance then. And later, when the 60s come in and we all become, touchy-feely and the importance of I went through a period of resenting my father for not being a greater part of my life.
So you're adrift with your own curiosity or your own tolerance for subjects or whatever.
Right.
You're going to need somebody guiding you, or you just know. So
I never felt like I needed somebody.
Well, you just dropped your prospects of being a doctor.
Yes. So then I look around.
Yourself?
Yeah. Well, I look around and say, well, what have I taken that might get me to graduate? I'm not going to go the doctor route.
Right.
So I've taken all these biology classes. I've been here for a number of years. What's the fastest way out? And the fastest way out was, math. I'd been forced, to take a lot of math courses. Right. It was always easy for me, and I looked up, I take 3 more math courses, and I do this and that, I can get out. So I do
math by default.
Yeah, math by default, because I don't have this great love of math that I would later develop.
Right. I mean,
not at that time.
You're definitely not on fire yet. I'm sensing that.
I'm not. I'm not.
You go to math.
Yeah.
Do you get excited?
Oh, by the math? No, because what's really going on at Berkeley at that time is not math.
No.
Right? I'm taking math classes from, some of the greatest mathematicians of our, of those generations. And, we're discussing politics.
Right.
Right. Nobody's doing anything they're supposed to be doing.
This is the free speech movement.
Free speech movement. Right.
So your energy, in a way, is elsewhere. Your intellectual ability is keeping you well within the math students, or are you doing really pretty well as a math student?
I think I was doing really well.
Yeah, okay.
It was easy for me. I could do it. And, but actually, I know when I sort of did fall in love, for want of a better description, with mathematics. So after I graduate from Berkeley, I do get out.
Yes.
I go to work for Bank of America.
So no graduate school thinking at that point?
No, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know. And so I go to work at Bank of America, and I'm a systems analyst. That meant a computer guy. Okay. And so what happens is, and then I go to the Federal Reserve Bank, and I fall in with a bunch of people, some of whom know something about mathematics and everything, and I can program, I can get paid. And so I start to read Martin Gardner, has a column in Scientific American called Mathematical Games. And this is I think this is such a common story among mathematicians of my generation. Martin Gardner influenced a tremendous number of us, and so too bad he's gone, because that guy really influenced this field. And so I remember I read various things, and I read about Gödel incompleteness, one of the great results of all time, both philosophically and mathematically, about the nature of truth in mathematics, the impossibility of apprehending it, raising questions about what is mathematics anyway, and giving us the answer, we don't know what mathematics is.
This is your Shakespeare moment in terms of mathematics.
Yeah, I guess it is. So I say to myself, I remember saying, I said, I'm going to go back to school, because I think if I go back to school and get a PhD, I'll be much more desirable on the job market, right?
True enough.
Which turns out to be false, because getting the kind of PhD I got meant there were 11 places I could work in the whole world, right?
Okay.
And didn't broaden my prospects. But I said, when I go back, I'm going to learn one of these grand sort of exciting things like black holes or Gödel incompleteness or something. I'm going to learn it not just as a cocktail party discussion.
Yes.
I'm going to actually learn what it meant. And so I go back to school in computer science, and I start to take mathematical logic.
Now, your ability to focus on computer science. Where are we in history where there is such a field? Is there a department at this point in Berkeley in computer science?
Yeah.
Is it an aspect of mathematics?
Yeah, they were going through the throes of what to do. They were building a computer science department. I think it already existed. They did have the difficulty of trying to figure out, should be part of mathematics, should be part of engineering.
Right.
At Berkeley, they came down on the engineering side, actually.
So it's the School of Engineering you actually
It
entered.
was.
Okay.
Okay. But I start to take mathematical logic. And math had always bothered me all through my life. I could do it, but I was baffled. I'm always confused anyway, but I don't like being particularly confused in a way that causes anxiety.
Right.
And so I was baffled when bizarre things would happen. You know, I understood dx, dy, but I didn't like it when they took the dy and put it on the other side and said, well, you know, now we're going to do this. I said, well, what, you know, are there any rules here? Do you just move stuff around? And I didn't like that aspect of mathematics. But when I start this quest in mathematical logic, and I have this great teacher, John Addison, and we start to do Gödel, all of a sudden, everything's built from these few axioms, Mello-Frankel axioms. And suddenly I said, oh, there is a foundation, there is a bottom of all this. Mm-hmm. And suddenly this beautiful tree emerges, right? That is mathematics, as best we know it.
I'm going to press your terminology, not to challenge it, but to find out more about it.
Okay.
I find with people who are mathematically inclined that aesthetic phrases are often used. Beautiful, elegant.
Oh.
Are you saying actually those words to yourself, there is a beauty in this that I am pursuing?
You know, historically, I can't know what words I said, but yes, it manifests, when I speak of mathematics, the whole thing, it manifests itself in my mind as this, and you know, it's not as vivid as this big crystal tree, right? And it is beautiful, and it's a place you can go around and you can look at more closely and see all these dazzling, beautiful things. And you can wander around that tree and see other things. And not only that, you can sometimes be surprised and see things that maybe you and nobody else has ever seen. These are beautiful experiences.
Yes.
And on top of that, you know, and this isn't from the contemporaneous with what I'm talking about, but in retrospect, you know, from my view now, I don't make those distinctions, you know, about beauty and creativity belonging in one area or another. I see it all around.
You're just intrigued.
I am intrigued, but I also see, you know, I don't think that there's a big difference between, you know, Bach, Rembrandt, and Gauss.
Yes.
You know, to me,
So,
those guys are the same.
young man, you're going to have to choose a PhD topic.
Yeah.
How are you going to do that?
Well, I got another tip when I was at the Federal Reserve Bank. And this was from a woman named Linda Kravner. She had got an undergraduate degree in mathematics, and she had spent some time with graduate work. And she said, when you go to Berkeley, see if you can work with Manuel Blum. Okay. Blum may be familiar because he's a Turing Laureate. And so I did look up Manuel, and I started to talk to him. Now, his stuff was very closely related to the logic I was falling in love with. And he himself is, you know, charismatic, brilliant, wonderful, out of the box, incredible guy. And so that was part of this process by which I, you know, found my way to a particular sort of thing. And the particular sort of thing I found my way to ultimately was what was called computational complexity theory. This was a new emerging view of computers, asking the question of, well, what can be done on computers and how fast can it be done? And started work in that, in particular with a specialization in number theory, an ancient discipline that I was fortunate enough that I had two lines of development in mathematics coming together and colliding. A very ancient one, number theory, goes back, at least to the Greeks 2,300 years ago or something. But at the same time, I had this new one, computational complexity theory. And number theory was full of algorithms, and we needed to know how fast they ran, and could we find algorithms that did the same thing but did it faster? That's computational complexity. So I got to be right at the nexus of these two events, and that was really fortunate because I recommend to all of the people listening to this, make sure you choose a discipline which A is just developing, and B is going to become a really big thing.
And that's guessable?
No.
No.
No, it's not. It's not. But if you can do that, it really makes the ride.
But you're also
fun.
Giving advice in a way by example of following your nose. I mean, you don't necessarily know where the future is going to be,
right?
But you know what interests you.
Okay, let me do a little public service announcement. To young people who might be listening.
Yeah.
I guess this goes under don't sell yourself short. That is, I see a number of researchers who are content to take a small problem and work to solve it, and many times succeed. But an alternative, and you're going to make your own decisions, this could be terrible advice, is to take the biggest problem that's out there. Riemann hypothesis is still open. NPP is still open, right? Work on those. Really work on them. Spend years working on them because, of course the odds are small that you'll succeed, but in the process of failure even, it can be a glorious failure. You can learn tremendous amounts during that time, and you can discover solutions to other greater problems. But if you never sort of try anything really daunting, you don't know if maybe it's your time. Maybe you will succeed.
So what is your actual thesis topic?
Yeah, number theoretic aspects of computational complexity. Taking, sort of Gauss meets Turing.
Okay.
Okay, and that's what it was.
Where is that going to lead you? It's the obvious question, but I assume it's received as a acceptable doctorate.
Yeah.
How does that place you professionally now?
Yeah, it places me in a very good position. But really, again, it's, so much of everything that happens in every person's life is a matter of luck and accident. So
preparation and luck.
Huh?
Preparation and luck.
Yes. And
you are prepared.
Yeah, I am prepared. So remember, this new field, computational complexity, and even computer science itself, is just emerging at the university.
Right, exactly.
So there's a lot of openings. Manuel Blum is a very esteemed guy, and he came from MIT. That's where he got his PhD.
Yes.
So he can write a letter, I assume he did, he never showed it to me, that said, this would be a good guy to hire. So I get hired at MIT basically as an assistant professor, right, in the mathematics department. Not because I'm so grand, but because I'm doing the right sort of thing that people are looking for at the time. So, and of course, that's a heck of a place to end up.
It's hard for a Californian to leave California. I'm going at the personal level. Are you hesitating at all at this point?
It was horrible for me. It was not good. So I not only had not left California, but I probably, other than going to maybe Reno with my parents, probably had never left the Bay Area.
Really?
Maybe I had made a trip to LA once.
Yeah, but essentially not.
Yeah. And and I remember, first of all, I got a rude awakening because, I took instruction from my friends that they explained it was going to be cold. And they explained that you buy clothes that have layers and you put on the layers as it gets colder. Well, almost as soon as I show up, I got to walk across a famously cold thing called over the Charles River, called the Harvard Bridge. about which famously Admiral Byrd said the coldest he'd ever been was on that bridge. I have to walk over that. And by probably by October, way before winter's going to show up, I got all the layers on. I got them all on, and so it was cold. And then I went to a McDonald's when I arrived in Cambridge, and I ordered my, Big Mac and, the usual stuff. And when the transaction was finished, I'm standing there, and the cashier's looking at me, and I'm looking at her, and then our transaction's over, and it's a little bit of an awkward moment, and maybe she says next, and I get out of line with my goods. And I realized she hadn't said, "Have a nice day." But in California, they always said, "Have a nice day." All right. So there was a cultural change.
Yes, that's
okay.
A coldness that was social as well as climatic.
Yeah, well put. And so, yes, and I had just been getting divorced from my first wife.
Wow.
I brought my German Shepherd with me who got killed the first week and, run over. I was as low as I'd ever been in my life. Okay. And I got sick, very sick, respiratory problems bothered me. And it was just pretty terrible. Okay. People, you're going to go through bad stuff typically. Yeah.
How early are you going to find intellectual companionship?
Immediately. So the only thing that's good is that I'm surrounded by these incredibly brilliant people, many of whom become my friends and, certainly become my colleagues. And that's wonderful, right? But for me, it's about the only thing that's wonderful.
Are they pulling you through conversation and intellectual interaction in any direction?
Yeah, they are. So what happens is it's a very collegial place, and people do shared research. They talk about the research. It's not really my nature. I'm the guy who will sit in his room for 8 hours a day, basically 7 days a week, for several years, thinking about exactly the same problem all that time. I'm really good at concentrating.
Yes.
And I'm not a person I enjoy interaction, but, mostly I think. And so, I have these colleagues who are wonderful to be with, are wonderful people, and are super brilliant. And they want to discuss problems. And so we discuss problems. And this leads to, I guess, my Turing Award is what happens. So they want to discuss problems often that I don't want to discuss. Okay, because, see, I picked up probably from Mr. Wizard that I should be, just do these great things, right? I haven't done any of them yet, but that's what I'm supposed to be doing.
And so, dispute in any case.
Okay. So I should be doing that, right? I should be Gauss, right? I'm in this to be Gauss, yes. Right? Okay, and so I'm only interested in the purest of the pure. I'm working on Fermat's last theorem. I'm not, right? So one day, one of my colleagues, Ron Rivest, says, "Hey," I come into his office, we're friends. Yeah. And he says, "Hey, did you see this paper by the Stanford guys? Diffie and Hellman?" And he starts saying, it's about you send this information and you scramble it and the person on the other side can't read. And I go, I think I said words really to the effect that, "Oh, that's nice, Ron, but, I got something important to talk about." Right? And so that's sort of the end of it for that day. But Ron is really struck by this. Ron has found a problem he's passionate about. And he's able to secure the collaboration of another good friend of mine, Adi Shamir, another brilliant guy. And they start talking about how do you find an incarnation of this concept of a public key crypto system that the Stanford guys had described in this manuscript?
Is this a coding issue? No. What is the core issue?
The core issue is you want cryptography, secret codes.
Right.
And secret code's been around for several thousand years,
Right.
but Diffie and Hellman are visionary enough to say, there's going to be this thing where everybody's going to be connected electronically, and they're going to start doing commerce, and people are going to talk, and they're going to need to keep their privacy and everything like that. Never going to happen, right? But of course it did, right? And for that, in that environment, you need secret codes to protect privacy,
Right.
and do other things, and traditional secret codes that existed before the Diffie-Hellman paper could not be used for certain technical reasons. So you need something new, and Diffie and Hellman were able to say, here's what something new would look like. We just don't know how to actually make one. Okay, so Rivest said, well, this is a computational complexity question that they're asking, and he says, maybe I can make one. So he enlists the aid of Adi, who
Right.
helps him.
And tries to get you.
Tries to get me, I'm not interested.
Right.
Okay. So, but on the other hand, we're really good friends. We hang out every day. And I remember we go on a ski trip to Vermont, right? And I'm in gondolas with these guys every day. And they're talking about nothing but finding this public key crypto system, right? And so, even to be sociable, I had to discuss it with them, And so this goes on. And eventually they're coming up with possible incarnations of this thing every day, every 2 days, every week. And most of them are pretty easy to dismiss. Many times I think they come up with them and then dismiss them themselves. But as time goes on, and we only in retrospect now understand why.
Fair enough.
As time goes on, these codes these methods start to rely more and more on the computational complexity of number theory, primality, factoring, those fundamental problems of number theory. And of course, I may not be able to do much, but if you have questions about computational aspects of number theory,
I'm your man.
I'm the go-to guy. Throw me the ball.
Right.
So they start coming up with all these number theoretic things, and because I know all this stuff, I'm able to look at them and say, no, that's not going to work. I can break that, I can break that, I can break that, right? This goes on. And then one day on Passover, there's a lot of Manischewitz wine. Ron, by the way, I should say, you may interview him, so I should, preface this by saying I don't think he recalls this. He may even recall something different, in which case he's incorrect.
But this is your times.
No, this is the correct version.
Okay.
All right. So anyway, and he drinks a lot of Manischewitz wine, as I recall, and we go home, and I get a call around midnight that night, and it's Ron. And Ron goes, hey, Len, what about blah, 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 blah. The blah, 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 blah is what we now call the RSA public key crypto system. And the second I hear it, I say, hey, congratulations, Ron. I think you did it.
You recognize that.
Yeah, because this is like where I live,
Yes.
right? Okay, yeah, you finally put the pieces together, right? This is good, right? So, good night, right? So the next day, and by the way, for those young researchers who are listening to this, I wish the story was better, but this is the way the real world goes. And so the next day, I think it's the very next day, I go into MIT, and I go into Ron's office because we're doing that kind of thing all the time, and he hands me a manuscript. It's handwritten. I wish I had it.
Yes.
Okay. And it is obviously the system he's come up with, the night before. And it's the authorship is Adleman, Rivest, Shamir.
Wow.
ARS. And I tell Ron, take my name off of this. It's your invention, Ron. And he said, no. we wouldn't have got there without your blowing up all these other crypto systems. And so we proceed to have an argument with me trying to get off the paper and him trying to keep me on. And we agree that we'll think about it a while and come back. So I go back, a day or two later. And by the way, I reflected very hard on whether I deserved to be on that paper.
Yeah, clearly.
And I recalled that there was one crypto system that looked really good at the first, and it took me, staying up all night to figure out how to break it. And by the way, after RSA was discovered, it was rediscovered and published as a new potential crypto system. Of course, it was born dead because I already knew how to break it. So, I said, well, maybe that's okay. I think it'd be okay for me to be third author.
Right.
And so I went back and said, look, Ron, make me third author. And that's how it became RSA.
RSA.
This is the way the world works. But, in my case, it worked out really well.
So are
very
you,
lucky.
who were initially bored by this, now increasingly fascinated by the problems represented by this?
No. I think it's a wonderful field. I think there's plenty of problems. I'm still more interested in the fundamental number theoretic problems that underlie this. Can you factor it fast and stuff like that? Okay. But no. I like the field, and I'm even sort of working in it. I got my own cryptocurrency that I'm developing. But no, I still have this quest to, I seem to have a need to find something very novel.
Let's get you to the next stage.
Okay.
On your own journey, in addition.
Yeah.
This was a detour that turned out to be productive for you and the world.
Yeah.
Are you still at MIT for the next X number of years, and what are you working on?
Okay. I continue to work on number theory. I leave MIT because being sick all the time and having a terrible time, I need to get back to California. I don't care what it takes. I regret leaving MIT because it's the best place. So I come to USC. And I continue to work on number theoretic problems and do a lot in that area.
Are you now a professor and assistant? How do you?
Oh, now,
Yeah. What happens when you come to?
I'm tenured.
USC? Okay.
Yeah, I'm
You
tenured.
become tenured.
Yeah, as a computer scientist.
As a computer
now I'm
scientist.
a computer scientist. Yeah.
And SC at this point has a computer science department?
Yes, they've just grown one, again, part of an engineering school.
And what are they expecting you to do here? How are you presented as, what is your competence? What is your hope?
I'm a theoretical computer scientist, and that's what I am. There's only 4 of us in the department at the time.
They're going to let you follow your curiosity.
Yes, one thing that I really thank USC for is they've always let me just do whatever I wanted to do. And, in many ways, what more can you ask for in life, than to get to do what you want? And so, yes, so I'm a theoretical computer
And
scientist.
what are you pushing? I mean, you're in numbers theory, but where are you going?
Right. I'm going towards trying to sort of develop the field of number theoretic algorithms, okay? I start a conference called the ANTS conference. I continue to work on fundamental problems in number theory, sometimes with success, sometimes with less success, and do that, right? I also dabble in cryptography, and so I do that. But I still have this sort of intellectual drive, I don't know where it comes from, to really do something grand, at least in my mind grand, and not to just sort of stay on a path that I could stay on. It just isn't the way it worked. So the next thing that happens is I'm by now maybe early 40s.
Okay.
And
the year is?
mid 80s.
Okay.
Okay. And if you read the papers and you're interested in science, the big thing is HIV.
Right.
Okay. And I read some popular press accounts.
Am I going to let you into HIV before I call you the father of the virus or the terminology of the virus?
Oh, the computer virus?
Yes, I think we at least
you want to
need
touch
to
on that?
detain ourselves there before we go to.
Okay, so among other things, I'm teaching I'm teaching classes in computer security because,
Right.
cryptography. And one day, not far from here, less than, an eighth of a mile from where we're sitting right now, I'm teaching this class on computer security. And this student comes up, his name is Fred Cohen, and he says, Professor Adleman, I have a new idea for a computer, security problem. And I said, what is it, Fred? And he says, well, I'm going to write this program, and then I'm going to make it available to people. And it's going to be uploaded, and then when people upload it, it's going to do something they never expected, right? It's going to give me all of the privileges. It basically what today would be all their passwords and everything like that. Okay, and it's going to send it back to me. Okay, and I said, oh yeah, that could cause a lot of problems, or words to that effect. And he says, I want to try it. And I said, well, it'll work, Fred. And he says, I want to try it. And I said, well, you don't have to try it, Fred. It's clearly going to work, right? And so we go several iterations. But, Fred is a wonderful person. He's very forceful. So on his behalf, I go to the department, the head of the department, and say, look, I got this student, he wants to try something out on the department computer. So this is way before everybody has personal computers, where all the students, the faculty, the administration, everybody's using the same computer.
Right. Worth remembering. Yes.
Yes. And so the department chairman says to me words that, I still sort of resonate over all these years. He says, why not? Right? So Fred implements his scheme, and I invite him to report on the outcome of his test. And of course it works. People should listen to me. Of course it's going to work. So Fred has written this program, and like an app you download that promises to do one thing but doesn't.
Doesn't, yeah.
This thing spreads through every user's chunk of that common computer. And Fred then owns every aspect of that computer. He can change people's grades. He could probably change people's salaries. I don't know what else he could do.
Extraordinary.
Right? Okay. So then people start thinking, what else you could do with these kind of programs. And the department starts thinking that. And they think maybe they shouldn't do any more experiments, right? So people start to get the idea, holy cow, right? This is really a problem. So Fred decides to do a thesis on this. And in the course of doing his thesis, we're discussing it. And because of something else going on in my life, my research, I start calling these things computer viruses because they look like, they're behaving like viruses behave in the biological.
It's a biological metaphor.
Yes, exactly. And so, then that becomes, now it turns out that in science fiction and literature they had been using that term before.
That very term.
That term, yes. But for whatever reason, it then gets popularized, in popular media as the computer virus, and that's the story of that. So Fred is the father of that.
Okay, I can send you now to your HIV moment.
Yes, and that's why the name computer virus comes up.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm reading this popular press article on HIV, and they're describing the pathogenesis, what's happening inside of the body, when somebody's infected. And I say, well, why couldn't I try this? Why wouldn't this work? I don't know any biology, but so I start to go to the library, a medical library, to try to find out how it all works. Mm-hmm. And it's really fascinating, to be in a medical library. And I find that all I need to understand medical papers is a dictionary that explains what words mean, mm-hmm. because in terms of the content of the paper, they're almost always, a graph of some finding. And, for a mathematician, that's easy.
Yes.
So I start to read it, and I get more and more intrigued by this. And I start to come up, abandoning these initial thoughts, I start to become more and more interested in how HIV actually works and the like. And I start to read about it, and I come up with a new hypothesis of the pathogenesis of HIV. And I tried to, convince the lead researchers in the HIV field to pursue my idea. But that's not going that well. And so I decide I will go to an actual molecular biology lab and learn some real molecular biology in order to get a better impedance match with these real researchers so I can speak their language. So I decided to spend a summer at a molecular biology place, and there is a molecular biology lab associated with USC that says, sure, come, spend the summer working with us. They're doing HIV research. So I entered that lab, and while I had sort of left biology when I was pre-med because it was disgusting, look, it's not, but to me it was,
yes.
Right? Okay. I enter the lab now, it's, been 20 years since that time when I was an undergraduate, and it's all different. Now it's about DNA, strings over a 4-letter alphabet to a mathematician, right? It's about all these things, and now it's mathematics, right? I can see it that way, and there's all these techniques for manipulating the mathematical objects. And so I get really interested. And so as part of this quest, I start to read a famous book by, it's this book, I think, Molecular Biology of the Gene. This thing, okay? And in it, they're describing polymerase, which is the molecule, it's a protein, that takes a DNA strand, a molecule, and makes a copy of it. It's what life is all about. If that didn't happen, no copies of DNA, no copies of cells, no copies of you. Right? This is big time.
And you too.
And me too. No copies of anybody. None of us are here.
Right.
All right. So this molecule jumps onto this strand of DNA, just a bunch of A, T, C's, and G's. And it's amazing. It runs down this molecule and it grabs new pieces out of the floating environment, new A, T, C's, and G's, and creates a second strand identical. It's a juggler on a tightrope, and it's 2 nanometers in every direction. It's an amazing machine. But what's, in addition to just being awesome technology, it also looks just like how Turing machines work. The description of the first computer given by Turing in 1936 in his paper on the Entscheidungsproblem. You got a little mechanical thing that's running down a string of letters. And I said, wow, these biological things are computing. We could compute with this. And so that led me to spend a little time designing an experiment where I would use DNA as the basis for a computer. And not in some way, I'm going to use it as wires or something, but to use its intrinsic properties, biological and chemical properties, to make a computer. See, Turing also taught us, the early logicians taught us, that computing is really easy. All you need is a way to store information, a few simple operations to manipulate that information, and you can compute anything. That is, all things that are computable, you can compute. And there's a million ways to go about it. And even though we expect to do it with silicon these days, no reason. So instead, it could be carried out in liquid. You can make a liquid computer where the information is stored in DNA and the manipulations, like making a copy of information, could be done by these molecules like polymerase. So I carried out an experiment, because I had the lab and I had all the reagents, to do that, to solve a simple computational problem in a test tube with DNA being the basis. So I did that, and it worked. Couldn't have failed. And so I wrote a paper. But I didn't know what you did with a paper in biology. Is this biology anyway, So I decided to send it to Science magazine, Science, the journal. And I didn't know what they would do with it, but I didn't know what else I was going to do with it. So I sent it there, And as I recall, I got a phone call from the editor, and he said, I want to talk to you about that paper you submitted. And I said, oh, yeah, what about? He said, well, the referees were ecstatic. I said,
You don't often hear
I don't
that.
get reviews like that.
Oh, yeah.
not even in my best mathematical stuff. And so anyway, it got published, and it was well received, and that it ended up, a lot of people became interested in DNA computation, and it led me to spend about 10 years with my own molecular biology lab pursuing DNA computation. And I didn't pursue that very well, but I ended up having students who were tremendous.
Okay.
Eric Winfrey and Paul Rodeman, both at Caltech now. And they were able to, use those ideas and other ideas. And they were able to do amazing computational things with DNA as the basis. And in addition, they sort of went beyond just doing computation with it. They used DNA to self-assemble incredibly beautiful structures. So if you want, like, if you happen to need, say, 100 billion little teeny statues of liberty, these guys can make up DNA, put it in an actual tube, shake it up, and inside will be 100 billion actual statues of liberty, right? In 3D, all made out of DNA, that all self-assembled into these little statues. Now, they're really small, they're hard to see, but
We're essentially at the intersection of mathematics and biology.
I think we are. And I think that's what I think one of the take-home messages is that what a cell is doing is computation,
Yes.
right? And so now let's look at cells as doing computation. Their molecular structures are carrying out computations. It's quite clear they are. And so it's not so much maybe mathematics and biology, maybe mathematics and biology and computer science, that these are sort of co-emerging things and are really much more similar than we may think. In fact, with time, I've come to wonder about what the difference is between something that computes and something that's alive. I'm not sure I think there is a difference, right? And so, it's this juxtaposition, of those two fields and perhaps the merging of them that is the most exciting aspect of it.
Oh, who is doubting this? Who is ecstatic by this? What does this intersection really mean in terms of present and future research as you see it?
Yeah, I think at the lowest level, it just means, for example, that we might be able to put computers inside of cells. I give you an injection, but it's not something that kills things. It's something that goes inside your cell and monitors what's going on and maybe kills the cell or kills what's coming in or changes this, that, or the other thing. Okay, we can bring computation to bear. We can also, people look at, can now look at like metabolic pathways and like as computational pathways. So I guess, we can all look forward to the day when there's hybrid, somewhat human, somewhat robotic entities. I think I've lost track of a lot of that because I've spent so much time thinking about a different aspect of this. And in fact, that's what I've sort of spent 40 years thinking about, a different aspect of this.
Different in what sense?
Yeah, in the following sense. So, Darwin taught us about evolution. And then Watson Crick came along and they said, and now we kind of understand that the fundamental agent of evolution is the gene.
Yes.
Turing taught us that what computers were. And a guy named Stephen Kliney taught us that has proved a thing called the recursion theorem, which for those who happen to care, could be seen as showing us that computers can replicate. Okay, so the things stored in computers are the fundamental elements of a new form of evolution and a new form of replication that can occur among computers. And then Richard Dawkins came along and he said, yeah, there are these things, memes. These are stored in people's heads, but they can mutate and they can be reproduced. Like I'm reproducing some of my memes into your head if you're watching this, right? And so those ideas can evolve, right? And so all these things can evolve. Do they all have common laws that dictate what they will do? The answer is yes. Some were described by Darwin, but some are things that people haven't observed yet. And so I've spent about 40 years since reading Richard Dawkins' paper in the 70s, or his book, thinking about this. And I think that there's a common theory that encompasses not just the biological, but also tells us a lot about the future of computers, where they're headed. It also tells us a lot about the nature of human endeavors, societal endeavors, political ones, religious ones. Darwin made it clear to us that it's the struggle of genes to survive that makes and destroys species. Well, it's the struggle of memes to survive in exactly the same way that makes and destroys political institutions, religious institutions, and the like. And though it's early, it's the struggle of these things stored in computers, which I've come to call scenes, portmanteau of computer and gene, which will determine much about what species of computers evolve in the future, what they'll be involved in, what their goals will be, where they're headed. Okay, so there's this common theory that's intrigued me for about 40 years, and I'd wanted to wait longer, until I could get this whole thing figured out. But I discovered that growing old happened before, that happened. So I've written a book on it.
Right, the book came out.
Hasn't come out.
Hasn't.
I need a publisher.
You're writing it. Okay.
Yeah.
And is that book going to be called Core Truths?
No, it is. Well, okay. No, it's called Memes, Genes, and Scenes.
We're going to end right there.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.